When it comes to network security, Palo Alto Networks is, you might say, a household name, renowned for its innovative approach to firewall technology. But even giants face vulnerabilities, and in recent years they've found themselves targeted, again and again, plagued by exploits that could, quite frankly, spell disaster for organizations across the globe. Now, this isn't the first time Palo Alto's name has been tied to security flaws, and history has a way of repeating itself, doesn't it? From 0 days that exposed critical systems to bootloader exploits that bypass security entirely, the issues have been piling up, revealing cracks in what's supposed to be a fortress of protection. What makes these latest vulnerabilities so concerning is their potential impact. We're not just talking about theoretical risks here. This is real, tangible damage, actively exploited in the wild. In the hands of attackers, these flaws can essentially dismantle the layers of security that organizations rely on, allowing for persistent malware, privilege escalation, and even total system control. Think about it. Firewalls are often the first line of defense, the gatekeepers of sensitive data and operations. When they're vulnerable, that spells trouble, big trouble, for everything downstream. All right, let's dive into the specifics of these vulnerabilities that are causing such a stir in the cybersecurity world. First up, we've got CVE-2024-3393. This one is being exploited to launch denial-of-service attacks. Essentially, an attacker can force a firewall to reboot just by sending a carefully crafted packet through the data plane. Simple to execute, but the potential impact? Devastating. Then there's CVE-2024-9474, a particularly worrying flaw that becomes even more dangerous when paired with other vulnerabilities. CVE-2024-0008 and CVE-2025-0108, for instance. Hackers have been chaining these together for remote code execution, which, to put it plainly, gives them the ability to run any commands they want on an unpatched system. It's like handing over the keys to the castle, isn't it? Speaking of CVE-2025-0108, this one's already seeing active exploitation in the wild. It's an authentication bypass flaw that can give attackers access to a device's management interface and let them execute PHP scripts. According to data from the threat intelligence firm Greynoise, exploitation attempts started popping up in mid-February, and by the 18th, we'd already seen nearly 30 distinct IP addresses trying to leverage it. But it doesn't stop there. CVE 2025-0111, another flaw being actively exploited, can be used to read files on the Pan OS file system. And attackers aren't stopping at just one CVE. They're chaining this one with CVE 2025-0008 and CVE 2024-9474 to maximize their impact. It's a strategy, a deliberate one, and frankly, a chilling reminder of how dangerous these vulnerabilities can be when left unpatched. All of this paints a pretty grim picture, doesn't it? From denial-of-service exploits to full-blown authentication bypasses, the stakes couldn't be higher. Right. Let's turn our attention to the firmware vulnerabilities affecting Palo Alto's PA3260 firewalls, specifically the ones found in the Inside H2O UEFI firmware. Now, these System Management Mode, or SMM, vulnerabilities might not sound immediately alarming, but they're incredibly dangerous. Why? Well, SMM operates at one of the highest privilege levels in a system, way beyond even the operating system itself. If an attacker exploits it, they can escalate privileges, bypass the secure boot mechanism entirely, and install malware that's practically invisible. And once it's there, that malware could persist indefinitely, undetected, modifying configurations or, just wreaking havoc behind the scenes. But that's not all. The PA3260 is also hit by an issue known as LogoFAIL. What happens here is that hackers can use malicious UEFI logo images to compromise the device. It's honestly kind of ingenious in a sinister way, subverting something as innocuous as a boot logo to embed vulnerabilities. Exploiting it allows them to tamper with firmware, opening up those same routes for privilege escalation or stealth attacks. And unfortunately, these kinds of vulnerabilities are far from just academic. they've got real-world consequences, serious ones. Take, for example, a recent enterprise breach I came across. It started with a firmware attack very similar to these flaws. The attackers embedded persistent malware, which then spread laterally across the organization's network. By the time they realized what was going on, they were, already dealing with a significant operational shutdown. It just shows how, when these vulnerabilities are left unaddressed, the implications can scale fast and wide. The truth is, firmware attacks target a layer that most organizations don't even think to monitor. And that gives attackers the perfect opportunity to exploit flaws like these. All right, let's get into another one of the key vulnerabilities facing Palo Alto's firewalls, one called BootHole. Now, BootHole is linked to the Grub2 bootloader, and what it does, essentially, is undermine a critical security feature called Secure Boot. What's Secure Boot, you ask? Well, think of it like a nightclub bouncer. It's supposed to check IDs and keep out anyone who doesn't belong. But with BootHole, it's like the bouncer just stops looking at the IDs. Suddenly, unauthorized guests, malware in this case, are strolling in right through the front door, no questions asked. But, and here's the more technical bit, this particular vulnerability isn't one that just anyone can exploit. To take advantage of BootHole, a hacker first needs control over the PAN OS system at, a really high privilege level. Root Linux access, specifically. That's no small feat. But once they're in, BootHole lets them disable Secure Boot completely, giving them the ability to install persistent malware, something that can stay hidden even across system reboots. Now, the implications of this? They're pretty significant. For organizations that use these firewalls, it could mean letting attackers plant malware that's exceptionally hard to detect, let alone remove. It's not just a penetration of defenses, it's a foothold, a hidden backdoor that security teams might not even know exists until it's far too late. And this doesn't exist in isolation. It ties back to how we think about firmware vulnerabilities more broadly, because like I said earlier, most of these issues are hitting layers of systems that go, largely unmonitored. Combine that with something like BootHole, and you're looking at a real nightmare scenario for any IT team. So let's begin with one of the most pressing threats, CVE-2024-3393. This zero-day vulnerability is being exploited right now, leading to denial of service attacks. Here's how it works. An attacker sends a perfectly crafted packet through the data plane, and just like that, the firewall can be forced to reboot. Imagine the disruption this could cause. Systems down, response times delayed. It's a huge risk for any organization. Then there's CVE-2025-0108, an authentication bypass flaw that's honestly downright alarming. Why? Because it allows an attacker to access a device's management interface and execute PHP scripts. This one's already out in the wild, being actively exploited by attackers from multiple IP addresses. And they've wasted no time. Greynoise recorded significant activity just days after its discovery. The point is, these flaws aren't theoretical. They're very real, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Now, what can organizations actually do to defend against these threats? First things first, update your PAN OS. Versions like 10.1.14H8 and 11.2.3 have specific patches addressing these vulnerabilities. Keeping software up to date, it's Cybersecurity 101, isn't it? But it's fascinating how often that simple step is neglected. I remember working with a firm not too long ago. They delayed a critical update, thinking they'd do it next week. Well, that next week never came, and they ended up facing a pretty hefty breach. It's a stark reminder of why we can't let updates slide. Second, secure those management interfaces. This means controlling access. Limit it to trusted internal IPs, shut down external-facing interfaces entirely where possible. A vulnerable interface is like leaving your front door open with a neon sign that says welcome. And finally, where resources allow, enable advanced threat detection features like threat IDs 51000 and 51001. These can help block exploit attempts before they even get to your systems. At the end of the day, cybersecurity isn't just about patching individual flaws. It's about having a strategy, staying vigilant, and being proactive. The landscape is constantly evolving, and the bad actors, well, they're evolving right along with it. Organizations that build their defenses with this in mind are the ones that weather these storms the best. And that's all for today's episode of Security News Elite. I hope you'll take these insights, these warnings, to heart, because at the end of the day, the best defense is preparedness. Until next time, stay safe, stay informed, and stay secure. Take care.